So I'm really glad you all are here, but I have to tell you, we shouldn't be here. And I don't mean that we shouldn't be drinking at the museum, because honestly, that's kind of fun. But I mean, there shouldn't be a here. A year after Vincent van Gogh's death, almost everything he ever painted was locked up in the Dutch countryside with Theo's widow. Theo was a huge supporter of Vincent, and he really believed in him, but he sold one canvas. Vincent had sold a couple others to family members, and he had traded, this was much more common, he had traded with other artists for supplies or for their own canvases. But the vast majority of everything that Vincent van Gogh created was locked up in a country house a year after his death. So how are we here? How does everyone know the name of Vincent van Gogh? Well, as with so many other things in life, it started with a 17-year-old girl who was determined to change the world. Jo Bonger, actually she grew up right near here. She grew up on the Wateringskans. And she grew up in an Amsterdam where something was shifting. Like there was this movement called the Tachtigers, and they were really trying to create a new way of art and a new way of connecting with each other. And there was these big social movements where they were taking a very vastly unequal Amsterdam and they were trying to make life a little bit better for people who had nothing. And she took as much schooling as she could, which was new. She could take teacher schooling, which she hadn't been able to take before as a woman. And so after she finishes her teacher schooling, she goes to London and she studies Percy Bysshe Shelley at the British Museum, and this is really cool. And then she comes back to Amsterdam and nothing. She keeps hitting this barrier that she can't quite see and she can't quite define. She's translating for the Amsterdammer and one of the other very popular papers. And it's fine, but people don't really take her in. She tries to write, but she compares her writing to the writing she admires, and she just despairs. And so she's like, okay, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to teach. I'm going to make my mark on the world by setting the pace for the next generation. And every school doesn't quite fit. So she did something kind of familiar. She put all of her energy and focus and faith into a relationship with a guy who jerked her around. You'll notice that was a very female laughter. This is something we still do. And so at 26, Jo was heartbroken and hopeless, and she didn't know what direction to turn or where to go. So she goes to visit her brother in Paris. And in Paris, she re-meets her brother's friend, Theo. Now, Theo had visited the summer before, and he had asked her to marry him in a matter of days. And she was like, okay, this is too fast. And then for the next year, she goes back and forth in her diary of I should have said no, right? That was too fast, right? Right? You can see it in her diary where she's kind of freaked out about whether she should have said yes or no. So this time, Theo apparently does this a little bit better. And this time when he asks, she says yes. And almost immediately, Theo has to disappear because his brother Vincent has cut his ear off. Yeah. So Theo goes down. He gets Vincent settled. They go up to Amsterdam where they get married. And once again, almost immediately, Theo has to go take care of Vincent because he's tried to kill himself. Theo gets Vincent settled in the hospital. You can see beautiful paintings of that this time when you walk around. And then he goes back to Jo, to Belle Epoque Paris. They're in Montmartre, which, if you've seen, Moulin Rouge, this is a very cool place to be. So they're in Montmartre, and Jo meets, a museum's worth of artists, because Theo is one of the few people who's really, really putting forward this new way of art. He's one of the few dealers that's actually working with, the Impressionists. So, bless you. So Jo meets all these really cool people. She's also pregnant almost the entire first year. They got married in April. She gives birth to a son in January, named Vincent, of course. And when Vincent is a couple of months old, she actually finally meets this man who's been casting this huge shadow over their married life. And he's nothing like what she expects. Like, she expects Vincent to be kind of fragile, you know? And instead, he like bursts into this room on this wave of energy, and he decides that they must eat olives. So he runs back out of the room and comes back with these olives and is like, okay, we have to have these now. But unfortunately, this up period doesn't last. And Vincent does succeed that summer in killing himself. And the part of the story that we don't know is that Theo was able to get Vincent buried. He kept it together through the burial. And then Theo himself succumbed to illness right after that. And the illness that Theo had actually affected his mind. So towards the end of his illness, Jo is visiting him, and he's lashing out at her and treating her like she's a stranger. And then within 7 months, he's gone. So imagine what this was for her. To go from like on top of the world and happy and in love to suddenly locked up in the Dutch countryside. There's this really heartbreaking part of her diary where she talks about visiting the grave, and suddenly she's lying on Theo's grave and she can't make herself stand up. She's just, what any of us would be. She's devastated. But she has to keep going for her son. And so she's in this guest house looking around, surrounded by these paintings. Like literally, we're talking like ceiling to floor to ceiling, over the ceiling, ceiling to floor. So she's surrounded by Vincent's work. And then she starts reading the letters going between the two brothers. And maybe at first she starts to connect with Theo, to get some piece of him back. But as she's reading these letters, she finally meets her brother-in-law, her real brother-in-law. She finds this artist who, like her, is really, really dedicated to finding the truth, to finding the beauty in life, to finding some sort of equality. And she decides that she is going to pick up Theo's mission. She is going to make Vincent famous. And she goes step by step. She knows one art critic. So she gets like the best excerpts of these letters that describe exactly what Vincent's trying to do. And she gets them to the art critic and has him come and see the paintings. And then he's not a critic, but she knows this other like modernist novelist. So she's like, okay, I'm going to get him in there. These will be my two guys. And with these two guys, she builds the first Amsterdam exhibition. And based on the Amsterdam exhibition, she builds another one. And exhibition by exhibition, she very carefully crafts the legend of Vincent van Gogh, including something that I didn't even realize until I started looking her up. We have this idea of this, genius working in seclusion, that this is how artistic genius works, that they're ignored at the time and they're discovered later, right? Like this is how we know that genius works. That's not true before Vincent van Gogh. Any painter you can think of, they had a studio, they had patrons, they had someone buying them buying their art, they had someone buying them paint, buying them stone. She creates that myth of the genius working in obscurity. And she tells it so thoroughly that we don't even remember it's a myth anymore. So I want you to enjoy the rest of your night, but as you're walking around, spare a thought for this. You are walking through the greatest monument to a lost love, bigger than the Taj Mahal, because it stretches all over the world. And it was created by this woman, Jo Bonger. Thank you. Thank you all. Enjoy your night.
Thank you.